Hello again, this is Grant Swartzwelder, and welcome to another episode of Oilfield Strong. We've got a fantastic speaker for you today, Chairman Jim Wright. He's here to talk about a very timely issue that's affecting the oil industry in a significant way. That's oilfield theft. It's funny, when you go out to the oil field these days, you don't ask if you've been hit. It's more about how recently have you been hit. And that says that the problem of oilfield theft has just grown and grown. Some people estimate it's $10 to $100 million of liability and cost per year. You know, you talk to oil companies and upwards to 40% say that they've been impacted by oilfield theft. It's used to be valves and fittings, and those still cost a lot. That's $300,000 a month or so in cost of impact. But it's also now crude oil, where folks are saying that's upwards to 60% of what's been stolen. So it's really changing, it's really growing, and so we're fortunate to have Chairman Jim Wright here to talk about this. He is Chairman of the Railroad Commission, has been on the Railroad Commission since January 4th of 2021. I think as impressive and as important is that he's a longtime Texan, South Texan, but is involved in the oilfield service business, having started an environmental service company many, many years ago. We won't say exactly how much there. So we're very fortunate, but I think one of the biggest parts, the most germane to this, is that as chairman of the Railroad Commission, he's also chairman of the task force for oilfield theft that was created under Texas Senate 494. So with that, welcome, Chairman. And I want to just throw a kind of an intro. Tell us how we got here and what the issue and what the problems really are.
Thank you, and good morning, Grant. It's good to be with you this morning. You know, if you look at oil and gas for the state of Texas, I consider it to be the biggest pillar that we have in our economic success here in Texas, and draws a lot of attention throughout not just our nation but the world. And when anything draws attention, you're going to have bad things that happen.
Yep.
So, I think recently with that attention, we've had a lot of people focused on, what can I do to get involved with that? And so a lot of people have come into the space, and and so do bad people come into that space. And with the remoteness of what the industry does, when you're out on ranches in the middle of nowhere and you've set up tanks and batteries to collect that product and either put it in a pipeline or it gets in a truck and gets hauled to a market. That they're just in locations that kind of encourage people to say, hey, you know what? Nobody's watching. I can do something here. So we're seeing a lot of that. And just recently, since we started talking about it in this last legislative session, it's really come to my attention as chairman of the Railroad Commission on what has really been going on out there. And you had said earlier that we think this is in the hundreds of millions, maybe. I've had reports where this has toppled over $1 billion.
Right.
In revenue loss that the industry is seeing today. So it's a serious issue. I'm glad legislation has paid attention to this and set us up to create a task force to start addressing it from boots on the ground level is what I call it.
Yeah. Well, and when we talk about the issues, again, we talked about valves and fittings. That's what everyone thinks of. They just grow legs and walk away. But crude oil seems to be a bigger where they're actually going out and taking oil and selling it someplace. What is the problem? Where, besides theft, but the specific parts of that?
Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head. We've always had stuff missing, chains and valves and all those kind of things, but they don't compare in magnitude when it comes to if somebody's picking up a 5,000 gallon load of crude oil and going away with it. And that's what we're seeing more of. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, when you've got tank batteries that are doing the collection of that production in these remote locations that are not manned by anybody, it really makes it easier for somebody to either clone a truck or just have a truck and go out and get a load and get it into a market where, I call it black marketing. And there's a lot of ways that we're starting to see that is being done. So I think that the mission here is for us to start removing out the ease of that we've seen over the past few years And that's what the focus is going to be from the task force that we just created.
And when you're hauling away crude, to me, that seems like a more sophisticated effort, whether it's an organized crime group, not to be Mr. Conspiracy here, but that doesn't seem like it's Bob in a truck going out there. So it seems like things are changing how this is being approached.
Oh, most definitely. You said it just now, the organized.
Yeah.
This is an organized effort. The FBI just found some folks that were very organized, more cartel related, that were actually looking at our website and looking at loads that were coming from remote locations. Like, say, an operator had a load that was ready to ship every month in somewhere that was very much remote. They were looking at the timing on our website, and they were sending that truck out just before that the real truck was supposed to arrive and picking up that oil. And then we're also seeing that there's trucks that are kind of being cloned
they're putting stickers on.
They're putting stickers and signs, and just like it was somebody else. So when they go on these ranches, and if they're noticed, people say, "Oh, well, that's so and so," and they're supposed to be
the normal
here.
purchaser or collector.
Right.
So as an aside, where does this oil go? You say there's a quote black market, but for me, it's hard to. Where do you take a tank full of stolen oil?
Well, there's two things that I've heard reports on, and that I've heard the industry talk about, and law enforcement too, is Mexico. A lot of this stuff ends up back in Mexico.
Okay.
I'm not sure how they get it crossed over the river.
Yeah,
But if you look at the Rio Grande River in some places, it wouldn't be that hard to put a hose across the river and just simply pump it off a vacuum truck and put it on another truck. And I'm not sure that's what's going on, but and then
it's
recently,
getting there somehow, and that's as fair of a
and then recently, we load ships a lot of times that are supposed to have some type of manifest showing where that product came from and what's on those products, but I think there was some internal working people that were actually responsible for loading these ships that were kind of being part of that, and we were seeing oil get on ships and being shipped abroad.
Now, I'm saying this in a snarky way. You mean you can actually forge manifest and forge paperwork to make things happen?
Well, I think we've all heard of that story before.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So in response to this, the state passed Senate Bill 494.
That's correct.
Explain what that is. Explain what the goal is of this task force.
Well, the legislature, a lot of people have been screaming about this is getting to be really a routine, serious issue about theft in the oil field, especially on product like crude oil.
Yep.
A lot of those companies were going down to their legislators and saying, "Look, we need to focus on this. We need to bring all the parties that are involved here together, and we need to create some solution to combat it." So, that's what I think created the bill, was just a army of people going down and saying, this is a serious issue and we need action on it, which I'm glad they did. Just from our first task force meeting that we just had this week,
okay.
I had law enforcement there, I had producers there, I had associations there. It was really a great first meeting on how we could collaborate with one another to really start putting, a dent in combating what we're seeing happening out there. So when you talk about the legislation, I'm really proud of what they did in putting a bill together that kind of forced all us to sit at one table.
And you kind of answered my next question that's kind of creeping around my head, is that sorry to say this, but as a voter, whenever I hear the state or government talking about a task force or a committee or a commission, I'm like, we're just kicking the can down the road. But it sounds like the coordination part is what has been missing, and this hopefully will help.
Yeah, but before this was really talked about in the legislation, I didn't talk to anybody at the FBI. I didn't talk to anybody on a local level as far as law enforcement, because I didn't know anybody in that space. But since legislation has been talking about this, it's been amazing how many of those have reached out to me and getting this thing coordinated in their effort and willingness to want to be on that task force and really provide their information along with what we have at the commission. And then to have, of course, producers coming in there and associations and saying, here's been our experience. You said a little bit earlier, the Dallas Feds just put out a report that 40% of our people in Texas have been impacted in one way or another through oil field theft.
Right.
That's a big number.
Yeah.
And when I told you, the numbers I've heard are like $1 billion just in a 1 year period. and you say there's 40%, that kind of starts to make sense.
And it would seem like, the larger companies probably are able to do cameras and security, but it's at mid-size and smaller who are less likely to be able to afford having 5,000 barrels just walk away on them that are really affected because they don't have the security capabilities.
You are exactly right there, but I will say the larger producers are, I'm talking about areas where when you get on a ranch to go find this stuff, you could be driving for a long time before you reach it. So it's so very remote that so many things can happen to electronic equipment out there that, I think it's kind of affecting everybody, including the big producers, because some of the associations that were just in our meeting the other day were, had huge concerns that, their members are large producers.
I had a friend that works for a independent company in the Delaware, so out in kind of the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. They have a video, but it's not a resolution where they could see the license, see the person, but it's all, again, middle of nowhere. So even if they had an alert, there's no way for the police to get there in time to do anything about it. So so the logistics makes it, even if you have the security, very hard. So,
I'll give you one specific that came out of the task force that I was kind of excited about. The Railroad Commission has a regulation where if you're going to haul anything that's related to oil and gas production, you've got to be a registered hauler, right, as far as waste is concerned. And of course, most of these places create a waste that's eventually going to be hauled off. So a lot of these same trucks, these vacuum trucks or tanker trucks, they haul waste and product. They commingle, not in the same load, but they'll clean out. They may go haul product today and they haul waste tomorrow. So we require them to get what's called a waste hauler's permit number. And in that waste hauler's permit number, we make them register the VIN on every vehicle and every trailer that they use. And when I explained that in the task force the other day, I had a representative there from the Texas Department of Transportation that said, that would be great if we could get access to that information. So if we pull these trucks over, at least we'll know whether they're legitimate and not cloned. So, I think that's one of the great things about bringing everybody together at the table and really start talking about, what are these issues? Some of the things that we're mandated to do through that legislation is to create a report to where not just only collaborating, but we're going to be looking at, what are other people doing? What are other producing countries even? How do they combat this? That's part of the study that we're required to do. We're also required to come up with, what is the state being out of as far as like severance tax on a lot of this stuff. So, the mission of the task force here within the next 12 months is pretty big. There's a lot of stuff going to be going on there. And I was excited and proud to see the volunteers that stepped up, that came and said, hey, we're willing to help. Because, again, it's not a paying position.
Right.
So, it was really, really pleasing for me to see that the other day, to the caliber and the horsepower that I had sitting in that room.
We've thrown around a lot of big numbers from 10 to 100 million to possibly $1 billion. Mm-hmm. And so it highlights the kind of the lack of data, the lack of recording. Now, you don't want to throw more and a poor operator on reports, but how do you even quantify this and be able to track? Because ultimately that's how you got to do something like that to be able to say if you've got a success or not.
Excuse me, I've got a little bit of a cold this morning.
No problem.
I think there's a lot of people got a little bit of a cold here lately. But your question is, we've been tracking production for a long time. We keep that record, and it's accessible through our website. I'm not sure that the
Railroad Commission does from a production, but as far as from a theft standpoint,
no, that has not been tracked. But that was one of the things that was talked about in task force the other day, and we're going to have to start tracking that. It's mandated by the bill.
Okay.
So we plan on setting that. We've got a gentleman by the name of Carr Ingram who runs a Texas Alliance for Energy.
Sure.
And Carr, as an economic guy, is his experience. That's what he went to college for. And so, I looked at him and I said, this is your space. And he was more than willing to start looking at that and taking that on to see what that's going to be. That's, again, required part of the legislation. But when you look at, as far as what that magnitude is, I think the data's there. And one of the things that I kind of suggested is maybe we start looking at the buyer side of this thing. Maybe we start trying to get buyers to where we're registering them, and we do a little bit better as far as the commission's reporting on, yes, you produced this oil, but now where's it going and who bought it? And maybe that's something that we could provide to help law enforcement is, kind of get these buyers to have to qualify to be in that space. I think that would help us kind of.
Yeah. Well, having the data is so important, but then working within a state of Texas and the bureaucracy, being able to mix all those data systems together, God bless you. That's going to be a challenge on that, because if I understand, Railroad Commission has identification number, TCQ has identification, and that should be kind of one thing, but it can't be. So now you're adding public safety and other things, so it's making it. That's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. A lot of people are disguising product as a waste. I think that's where you're probably going to see the majority of this end up being is a lot of these trucks that are pulling it away. It's more of, I went and picked up a load of water that needed to be injected when it's not a load of water.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of ways to disguise this as you're moving it, to places that you shouldn't be moving it to. And so I think you're exactly right, but I'm very proud of the commission that we've got a pretty good IT department today, and we're working very hard to try to close the gaps on a lot of these things that's going to be required of the task force.
So you obviously just got started. How will you ultimately determine whether this was a success? That's kind of what are your goals, but when do you think things will come out? This report. How do you?
Well, the report is due at the end of 27.
Okay.
Prior to the next legislative session. I think it's 27. Quote me on the year there.
Sure.
But, prior to the next legislative session.
You got a year or two.
Yeah. Yep. So we got a lot of work to do in a short time to do it. But, you can measure that success by how much are we putting a dent in? What is our severance tax increase going to be? What are royalties going to be?
Yep.
Because, one of the things that was mentioned the other day is we're not just losing severance tax. We've got mineral holders out there that are also losing revenue on this.
And that's because until it gets sold, that's what triggers the royalty, the severance.
That's so what I understand. We don't have anything to do with the contracts between a production company.
That would make sense. If it matched the physical property.
But if I were
at the wellhead.
On contracts that I write in my business, I tend to go that extreme because I want to make sure everybody's protected. Yeah.
So up until the next 2 years, y'all are going to be busy and working. But what are some suggestions for oil companies to do now? Because in the next 2 years, so put your FBI agent hat on or your Secret Service or whatever. And what are some suggestions there because, in the next 2 years, there could be, by anyone's calculation, a whole lot of money disappearing into the ether space.
And that's driven by our economics, right?
Yeah. Well, and what is it they say that why do you rob a bank? And that's where the money is.
Exactly.
And
you're right.
Oil is money.
Who knows what's really going to happen over the next 2 years. And if the economics don't go right, it's going to get worse. But, one of the things I've heard from a lot of the smaller producers today is we bought lots of game cameras because we know some of our product's been missing. Mm-hmm. Those areas are so remote that having a sophisticated system out there that runs off of, say, a cell type system through the phone, you don't have cell data out there. So most of them that are in that remoteness, look at game cameras and stuff. But as you start throwing attention at anything, it seems that people start paying attention to it, and they start having an action. So I think it'll get better. I think it's going to get better just because of the attention that this is now bringing.
And it seems like most things, like cameras and such, and I agree that's a great idea. It's kind of reactive. It's after the fact. You go and you find the oil missing and you see the camera, then you got to go find it. And you could talk about, well, how do you prevent that? And I don't know how.
That was part of what I heard in task force the other day from some smaller producers is, we bought game cameras, but the guy also picks up our game cameras.
And you're missing the 5,000 barrels right there. So it's
that's right, and your game camera.
And the game camera.
Right.
Well, and so to prevent that is, it seems like more patrols, having people, more police. You've got to, but a lot of these are remote counties that don't have the money for that.
Our intent is to try to take this task force into the heart too, and have some of these meetings so we can bring more everybody involved and more on the side of the law enforcement, so that we can start explaining to law enforcement, here's where you can go get that data. Here's the remoteness of this, and this ought to be part of your portfolio of what your, kind of the responsibility of your sheriff's departments are, local police departments, if everyone, TxDOT, Department of Transportation, everybody, to have a more coordinated effort and the knowing of, where is this stuff?
Yeah, it's. I think once you get the data, and it makes obvious sense that those remote areas of far West Texas, you'll be able to identify where your hotspots are, and that makes it easier to put a defense system in place or more
That's exactly
security
right.
or more.
Yeah, it's the same way in the Eagle Ford too. We've got some pretty remote areas there, and that's my intention, is to take the task force, not just sit here in Austin and hold these meetings. I want to be out there in the middle of it so we can bring others in to the task force and start trying to educate them better.
And you bring up a good point, because I'm so focused on the Permian with these comments, but the Eagle Ford, right near Mexico, if that's the case, a lot of remote. Can you divide that out into, is that, I assume, far South Texas, far West Texas, those are the two primary areas, or?
Well, certainly. I mean, they're the most productive. They're the ones that are drawing most of the attention, and they're the ones that are being most impacted today, from what I'm understanding.
Big production and most remote.
Yes,
That's a good
correct.
combination,
Right.
if you're looking to steal there.
Definitely.
So will there be any type of interim reports, or we just need to wait for a year or two to get that report? How's that going to play?
I made it my own personal mission to try to keep the public aware of what the progress being made on the task force is. We just put some stuff out yesterday on kind of what that first meeting was about. If you'll look at our website,
Okay.
we've posted that now. It's kind of the same thing I'm telling you now.
Sure.
What we went through is we created a charter, and that charter was designed around what is the bill specifically asking for. So
Respond to that.
we had a lot of discussion on, here's what we're mandated to do. And then we talked about who in the room is going to be responsible for this and how we're going to coordinate this. And that's where it came up that, we need to expand that. We've got 13 members on the task force. That doesn't mean that those 13 are going to be doing. I think we need to let everybody come in that has some impact on this to be part of it. And so we talked about subcommittee. We talked about a lot of stuff to get more people involved.
And realizing that's your first meeting,
Yeah.
you've got a little ways to go, and it sounds like you laid the groundwork.
The one thing I've said all along, if you want a problem solved, you've got to communicate. And to me, the biggest success we've had since I've been there is communication.
Yeah. Well, and I think you've got a history of focusing on kind of fair regulation. You being a service provider, you understand regulation comes with cost, time, money, and so balancing that all out is a challenge.
Yeah,
So
you take Winter Storm Uri as an example. I know when I first got to the commission, the Public Utility Commission is in our same building, but I don't think we ever said hi. I don't even think we held the elevator for those guys, and vice versa. Whenever I first
that's
got
the most
there,
interaction is getting on the elevator together.
yeah, and then we wouldn't talk to one another. And me being new, I didn't know anybody there, but it was kind of funny to me. People that had been there for years, they just, it seemed like it was, we don't talk to different agencies.
Yeah.
That's what I just personally saw.
I
And
can see that.
so when Winter Storm Uri happened, it kind of threw us all in one boat. And if people notice, I haven't lost electricity since Uri. I don't know about tree failure on a line
Sure.
and stuff like that.
Acts of God.
All that occurs, but as far as what we saw in Winter Storm Uri, that hasn't happened. And we've had some pretty good weather related things that have happened to us since then. Six different really cold snaps since Uri has happened, and we haven't lost electricity. And I tell people all the time, we haven't lost electricity because the PUC and the commission got together and we decided, hey, you know what? Let's get your electrical guys and let's get our fuel guys and let's make them talk
Right.
and communicate. So every time we have some type of weather event, whether it's a cold event or a very hot event, we bring together everybody and we talk about, hey, here's some of the issues we're going to be seeing in the future. That's what's been so successful about that being us being without electricity.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for talking about oilfield theft. I would be amiss having the chairman of the railroad commissioner here if I don't ask a few bonus questions.
Sure.
You open for that?
Yes.
All right. You talked about regulation, Senate Bill 1150. made big news because there was a coordination between industry and environmentalists to talk about inactive wells. Inactive wells over 15 years need to be plugged. What's going on with that?
It is a big it's a big concern. Texas today. I'm just going to round it off. We probably have 300,000 holes in the ground.
Yep.
In our history
that we know of.
Yeah,
and there's others that, because when was the last time Railroad Commission didn't start recording things till?
So I want to say it was 1920 something.
Yeah. So there's stuff before then.
Yeah, 1901 is the first time that we had oil coming out.
Sorry to interrupt.
Right. But yeah, I think that that was another bill, that legislation heard people being concerned about, and there is concerns there because some of the regulations that we were seeing before in the past administration was driving a lot of that too. But it's a huge concern for me, and what I think people need to pay attention to is, if we've got that's going down in through our groundwater and into some other formation that used to be productive, all those are kind of a pathway to potentially produce harm to our groundwater.
Well, and once you contaminate groundwater, you're not
party's over.
You're not uncontaminating.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. The party's over, and that's probably what keeps me up at night more than anything else.
I've always thought that methane is important, clearly, and this is my opinion, but methane's important. But that groundwater and what you're not seeing is probably even more devastating. But you can't see it, so it's a little easier to avoid it.
Yeah, I have required and with my authority to really start paying attention, to make sure that, are we having impacts on this? Of course, when you look at West Texas, take Pecos, for instance, and you look back at the history of when they used to do a lot of farming out there, cantaloupe was very dominant, cotton was very dominant.
Sure.
And you look back at what was the quality of that water way back when? Wasn't great quality way back when. No. And it hadn't changed a whole lot. What's changing out there, and that what people don't realize is today we produce 6 million barrels of oil every day. Well, what comes up with oil? You have natural gas mixed in with that.
A whole lot of water.
The largest quantity is water. And
yes.
People often ask me, you're in the oil business in Texas. I said, no, I'm really not in the oil business. I'm in the water business.
You're kind of in the skimming business.
Because I've got about 5 barrels of water that comes with every barrel of crude. Yeah, you're exactly right. We're in the skimming business. So, if you just do the simple math on that, that's 30 million barrels a day that we're putting into formations that we're not bringing it from. So, it's a lot like this coffee cup that's sitting before me. That may be 8 ounces or whatever that is. I'm not going to stick 20 in there. So I think it's important that we start really focusing and putting a lot of effort on water reuse and treating that water, because technology has come so far that I think that's a good source of water. And guess what? We don't have any of it here lately west of the 98th in Texas is water. So I think we have a good potential.
Isn't one of the bigger issues on that water use is the liability associated and what level of water clarity or purity it needs to be able to put into a river, to put into irrigation?
Most definitely.
How do you fight through that?
I've had many meetings with our state people at the TCEQ. Part of me being in Dallas yesterday was one of many meetings with the EPA,
right,
to start looking at, setting a standard. What is that treatment standard to be? But I think that standard needs to be set up on what is the intended use of that water.
Right.
I think when you look at that as far as recharge of your aquifers, or if you're going to go to a surface water sources that municipalities are going to use, you have to look at what's going to happen to that water from the point of discharge to the point of use. And then after somebody picks it up, what's going to happen to the water again? I don't think it's a one size fits all.
Doesn't need to be.
At all. And that's been where I've been trying to campaign with the other regulatory agencies is, guys, we need to put a lot more thought into this. We don't want to just set a standard up that discourages people reusing it. We need to really look at it with common sense and create standards that would encourage it, and safe standards, of course. But I think we're starting to make a little bit of ground there on that. But you think about 30 million barrels a day, that's a lot of water. Yeah. And we need water in Texas.
I always say that if you could use that for irrigation, West Texas would be the mecca of all agriculture.
I started on this 4 years ago, and I was invited to a meeting out in Midland, and the mayor of Odessa was there, and the mayor of Midland was part of that meeting.
Yes, sir.
And of course, I was the one doing most of the talking, which I normally am. But I said, for once, I'd like to fly out here and just look down and see some trees. Of course, mayors didn't think that was very funny.
No.
But my what I meant there is that you're very arid out here. Not a lot of stuff grows, and if you could just take and irrigate just the ranch, for an example, where you run 1 cow every 1,000 acres, what if you could run 2 every 1,000 acres? You realize that's 100% increase in your production. And that's just on your natural vegetation.
But all this is driven by economics. And I believe, and you probably know better than I do on this, that it's still just cheaper to drill a freshwater well, bring it up.
Not so much in West Texas anymore.
Okay.
When we've seen earthquakes occurring, seismicity,
Yep.
and we're starting to see that, seismicity is caused by deeper injection. We've curtailed a lot of those wells back to shallower injection, or we're starting to see increases in pressure in those shallower formations. So we're setting up what we call seismic response areas, which is causing people to move that water out. What happens when you start moving water long distances?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest costs of water handling is the handling, the trucking.
The handling. You're exactly right. Yeah. So if you look at it today with our curtailment of what we've been doing out there, you're at about an even parity when it comes to injection or treatment. So the economics are working. And I'm excited about that because I think now we really have the best opportunity we've ever seen in our history to start utilizing that water for better use instead of just injecting. And that goes back to your original question. What about these wells?
Yeah. Thank you for getting me back on topic.
We've got to take away the stuff that makes those things that are potentially harmful.
Yep.
And water is one of those things.
So thank you for, like I say, getting me back on topic. So on that, how did y'all come up with 15 years? And I say y'all, I don't know who the legislature, but why not 10? Why not 20?
I've got a perfect example for you for that. Technology in our industry changes almost on a day-to-day basis. I've got people that are coming up and saying, Commissioner, we've got wells out there. We have plans for those wells. We were just waiting for some.
Everybody always has a pole. Everyone's going to. But if the integrity of the metal and the concrete in the annulus goes away, you ain't doing anything.
Right, exactly. But I had a small guy come up to me the other day. He said, I picked up a few of these wells, and he said, I went to what's called auto swabbing. He said, I'm actually producing more oil out of these wells than when they were originally first drilled because of this new technology in auto swabbing. And then, if you just look at what Comstock did in the Haynesville here the other day, they invested a ton of money now in the natural gas play there, and they're talking about going into some of those old wells and trying to get them back to where they're active again producing natural gas. So, when you talk about 15 years, I think that allows people, ample time to figure out if those wells could come back and be beneficial in the future, and to make a plan of, or what are you going to do with them? But we're only going to allow you 15 years to have some kind of plan for that. Not to say that you can set it there and it be idle for the next 15 years. We already have a rule in place that if you don't show production, in the first, within 12 months, then you're obligated to go plug that well. That's been part of our rules forever.
But then they can ask for
an extension, and those are a lot of the excuses that we get in that.
Right,
but with a hard stop at 15, I think it's really going to force more people to really take a harder look at that. To say, okay, 15 years is not really that long. Not in my lifespan anyway, because it seems like they go by like lightning now. But I think it's going to encourage people. I know I've had a ton of them come up to me and say, 15 years is just not long enough. I'm like, it's plenty long.
Well, again, based on, there's wells that are 5-6 years that because of the brackish water, what's going on down there, that the integrity of that well.
But it goes back to what I was saying before. Why do we not want these holes in the ground? My biggest thing is the water and the overpressurization. Of course, water is always going to seek the path of least resistance. And you're right. A lot of this stuff is old. Integrity's bad. May have holes in the casing. That's what my fears are. Yeah. So, if we can remove the underlying that could be an environmental hazard, then that kind of buys us some time. And again, with the drought conditions we have in Texas, and that a magnitude of water.
And it's not going away.
I don't think there's a choice. The industry, our agency, we have to really start putting a lot of focus on that. And I think we have been, and I think you're going to see that'll be a reality. That's just my personal prediction for the future. But if I'm reelected to another 6 years, I'm going to continue fighting that till it happens.
My sense, and you can respond to this or not, it's that methane was the highlight, and now that's slipping away a little bit, and the orphan wells, the water, the integrity of the surface related seems to be, from a public standpoint, more of a focus.
Yeah, if I had to put it in perspective, methane is secondary to the water issue that we're having. Methane is a concern.
Sure, not saying it isn't, but I know you're not.
And wells may leak methane today, or they may not be leaking methane today. But if you're putting pressure on that formation where the bottom of that pipe is, they're going to leak something.
Yep.
And I said this whenever the last the Biden administration was here, is that if we could encourage more in getting in a better carbon credit market, that we could maybe start putting effort into measuring methane on these wells, and I think that would have been more encouraging for people to go out there and want to plug them if there was a revenue side to that.
It's all about economics, isn't it?
I love our new president. I'm certainly a huge supporter of his, but I wish he'd have used two things instead of one thing. And he's done great, I think, with the tariffs from what I'm seeing. Not that I'm any kind of an economic guy, but I wish he'd also used carbon credit market, because if you think about what the philosophy is there, who should be buying carbon credits? Well, the people that I know trade with us that their economic success is really based on is China and India. Who does nothing about their atmosphere? China and India.
Yep.
So I think that if we could push and encourage that we get support from both sides on something like that, and increase a market that would encourage people to want to go out and stop those sources of greenhouse gas emissions like methane from idle wells. You'd probably have a mass plugging effort if that was there available.
So getting rid of orphan wells and inactive wells, you've got a big volume. So plugging is one thing, but then how you plug them is another. How do you think we're doing the W3 hasn't been updated in 40 years. We interviewed a guy named Skylar White, a rancher out there that has wells kind of coming back to life. Is that an issue? How do we handle that type of thing?
Every time we get a complaint that apparently they call them coming back to life, that a plug may have potential failure, we're not seeing that when we send out our inspectors so much. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen,
Sure.
and I can expect it to happen. More pressure that increases in a shallow formation, you're going to have plugs that fail. I mean, it's like driving a car down the highway. If you're going to keep hammering on that car and you're going to keep using it, something's going to fail. Those plugs, the intention of those plugs was to sit there and not have outside impediments on it that could degrade them. And that, again, if we can remove that underlying source of what potentially could degrade those plugs, I think we'd still be in very good shape of the plugs that we're using. But if you look at technology, like I was talking about earlier, there's a lot of new designs of plugs coming up, and some that I'm really impressed with, that I don't know how you could ever degrade some of them that I'm seeing out there that people are talking about. So I think as you get more focused, especially with the 1150, the new bill that came on,
right?
I think you're going to see a lot of people poking up into the market going, hey, I got a new way of plugging this well. And I think you're going to see a lot of that's going to be out there on a pilot program basis. Again, just my personal prediction. I'm not speaking for the agency at all on this, but I've been in business a long time in my life, and you know how things occur. We've got a lot of idle wells. We have a lot of money that's being focused on really addressing that problem. As you notice, they also gave us an additional $100 million. That $100 million is to really go combat those like Mr. White is concerned about. Sometimes they're referred to as zombie wells. I don't like referring to them about that. They're failed wells.
Right.
But that's what that money's spent for, because we've had to go deal with that. Just in our last fiscal year, we had about 5 or 6 of them that became a sprinkler system, as I think most everybody knows.
Yep.
When they get to that form, they become very expensive to plug. I'm talking about $8 to $15 million that we spent on a lot of these wells. And that was the reason we went over and said, hey, we're going to have more in the budget to do this, because we can't allow that to happen, and we're going to have the money available to do it.
And back to your point, they're sprinklers because of the pressure of the zone.
Got to remove the source.
And that kind of becomes the root cause. So,
right.
All right, one more bonus, and then I'll let you go.
I'm fine.
I expect, as chairman of the Railroad Commission, you can tell me what's about to happen in the industry. We've got, it looks like, a lot of pressure, federal government, to lower oil price because that helps on natural gas. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but either way, it sure seems like we're in for a fall or a winter season for 6 to 9 to 12 months. You see a lot of layoffs, see drilling dropping.
I've been in the industry all my life, and I've seen it time and time again. You see oil prices go up, things are great, people get hired, and we got jobs.
Yep.
You see price go down, people get laid off, things are horrible. But as you see that happen so many times, people start to get discouraged. And when I say people, I'm talking about investors, I'm talking about workers, I'm talking about all the things you need to make this thing continue to be a success. So my focus has been always, and especially when I came into the Railroad Commission, is how can Texas have an impact on the world itself to where we can start holding steady in our pricing, a pricing that is competitive, that we can not only deliver the product to our nation, but to the world. So, I've been focused on what can we do to be a driving force, to be the biggest driving force in the world as compared to OPEC or Russia. And to only do that is we got to get exposure to more market. And if you think about it, it was just in 2016 when they lifted the embargo. So we're kind of new to the world market. Again, my personal opinion.
Sure.
But, I think that what I've been working on is I've met with some people from Qatar, some of the royal family members over there. Qatar produces lots of natural gas. They're probably the world's largest exporter of LNG, and they sell LNG into markets we've never even sold an ounce of crude to. So they've come over and said, you know what, we'd like to be more of a turnkey provider for our customer base. We'd like to buy our crude from you because your stability that you have in Texas in producing that. I think that's what it's going to take for us to make sure we get stability in that pricing, and to make sure that we've got a price that investors and people that work in that industry are going to be there day in and day out. A lot of people say, well, I want my gasoline price to go down. Really and truly kind of don't want your gasoline price to go way down because that impacts everything else that happens in your life. It's all a matter of economics. Yep. So, to me, when you talk about economics, everything is relevant. It's steadiness that really makes economics better. So removing peaks and valleys, I think is what the answer is for us. And that's been a big part of my mission at the Railroad Commission, is to encourage us finding better markets so that we become a player enough where when OPEC decides they want to dump on the market, that it doesn't impact what we're doing here.
I think most companies say if you could just give us a level amount, level price,
definitely.
It makes
that's in
easy.
any industry, right?
But to your point, my wife came to during one of the last busts and was so happy that her SUV cost about 50% less to fill up. I'm like, well, that's great, but my net worth just dropped the same amant, which is not a good thing. So it's hard to.
When I talk about relevancy, here's what happened to me in COVID. Gas prices went through the roof. I remember paying over $4 a gallon here in Texas, which is pretty high. So a lot of my employees in my personal business came to me and said, boss, we can't afford to get to work anymore on what you're paying us, so we're going to need a pay increase. Certainly, I understand. Gave them a pay increase. Price went down to $2.50. I went back to them.
They gave it all back, didn't they?
I said, can I have mine back? Well, hell no, you can't have it back.
Yeah,
so when I talk about relevancy, that's what I'm saying about steadiness. You get a better bang for your buck if you can keep things steady and make it relevant. If I'm making $10 an hour, then I need to be able to buy products that I can afford at $10 an hour. Yep. That's my point. Chairman
Wright, thank you very much for your time. What you just saw there was You might not be completely happy with 15 years versus a smaller amount. You might not be happy with a task force versus some other action. But I think at least what we're seeing is that the chairman and the Railroad Commission are making actions. And that's what I really like, that there's at least a movement toward a solution. And we'll see how it all plays out, but at least it's starting to have a solution for oilfield theft, for the orphan wells situation. And I appreciate the chairman coming and explaining that and showing leadership in that area. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Please look on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for other Oilfield Strong episodes. Thank you.